Today marks the 40th day of protests in Iran and beyond. In the following show, we hear from people experiencing the Iran protests, for which the cry, "Women, Life, Freedom," has become the banner chant. In Iran and around the world, momentous and incredibly moving protests have been raging for 40 days today, since the 16th of September 2022. They have raised a movement labelled the First Feminist Revolution. A reaction to the death of 22-year-old Kurd Mahsa Amini, the country and its diaspora, customarily locked in fear of repercussions, now speak out with a burgeoning political arts and culture movement and an activism unlike any before. With no identifiable leader to assassinate, women and children lead this revolution alongside their grandparents and striking oil, steel and other industry workers all over the country. What can listeners do to support the Women Life Freedom movement? Our own governments have made sanctions on the ordinary people of Iran until rice was 6 times its normal price, for example, or medical aid was withheld, while the government members and their families have enjoyed unimpinged travel freedoms, and from their own Instagram accounts we can see what moral freedoms these families enjoy, while imposing the strictest and most ruthless laws on the rest of the country. Only recently, James Cleverly MP announced targeted sanctions on members of Iran's military forces, but there are many large companies and offshore assets that they could be seizing instead for fear of ending nuclear talks or losing access to energy, such as the USA recently did under Biden's administration, release confiscated funds and even political prisoners to a regime brandishing nuclear capabilities that is receiving on the one hand and brutally killing its own with the other. We hear direct from Iranian voices both inside and outside Iran on the protests and what they feel those living in more democratic societies ought to know. We also hear from activist Steve Marsling, who as a teenager in southeast London so many years ago worked towards the end of the bloody South African regime with exemplary success. The following voices were sent in anonymously and end with a report from the social media account of a Dr. Iman Teheri, MD, an Iranian surgeon who became stranded in Toronto during the pandemic. Some of the accounts are very moving, and while some graphic details have been audibly blurred out, listeners should be aware that children must not hear these. Only today, a video recording came out of Iran, despite the internet strangulation, which was aired on BBC Persian News. In the video, a government army official outside a girls' secondary school in Tehran calls on a megaphone to his colleagues to beat them all, referring to the youths protesting inside.
You know what is happening in Iran? The Islamic Republic is in front of the young generation and people. Police easily kills and arrests the young generation who want their right to life, a normal life. What is normal life? They can feel peace. People can have his own opinion and say it easily because of their future, to love from the bottom of their hearts. For women to be able to wear the clothes they like without the police arresting them. Do you know how old the young people who are fighting in the street? Yes, most of them from the age of 11 to 25, 26 years old. Some of them are 7 years old, 8, 9, so. Yes, they are so young. It is so painful and so sad a story. But it's not a story, it's real life in Iran. Do you know from where the story of Iranian revolution began? A 22-year-old girl was killed by the police because her hair was not fully under hijab. Yes, her name was Mahsa Amini. About 40 days have passed since that day. And when the rest of the girl and young people came to the street, the only things they want is woman, life, freedom. So let's to be the Iranian people voice. Woman, life, freedom. زن، زندگی، آزادی.
Armita Abbasi, 21 years old. was arrested after participating in an anti-regime protest in Karaj, Iran. A week passed by and no one heard from her, until last week. On October 18, 2022, she was transferred to Bahonar Hospital in Karaj by a team of security forces. At the time of admission, her chief complaint was reported as bleeding. Her head had been shaved and she was constantly shaking and crying. The security forces insisted on taking her to an isolated room. Although specialists such as internal medicine, gynecologists, psychiatrists, and even forensic medicine visited her, the security forces prevented them from documenting their findings. While she was being prepared for a colonoscopy, her family was informed and was able to go to hospital to finally see her. Before her family could ever lay eye on her, the security forces had kidnapped her from back door, and no one has heard from her since that day. Some hospital staff reported the incidents and demonstrated their concerns, while others tried to bury the case. There are many dark angles to her story, but the most critical question is, where and how Armita is now.
This is an urgent question in the parliament session about Iranian officials and family members trying to escape to the UK. So a member of the parliament is questioning why the UK immigration is even considering the possibility of allowing them in.
Hi. I really appreciate that you care. The link was sent to me by one of my friends. When first I saw the Radio UK, I was thinking of the whole memory that my people in Iran have during all these 44 years. Everybody's thinking that this shitty regime is exactly the outcome of the decision of the UK. If I want to tell you my story, I'm not looking for any rescue. Not for me, not for my people. You don't need to remove my name, my number. Well, I'm not a brave one because I live in Canada, but I mean, in general, I do not give a shit. As a short story, the shortest and the saddest story these days that I keep reviewing and crying and praying and yelling is the story of the girls in the prison, in jails, and they all ask either from their family or from the lawyer or everybody, every connection outside of the jail, they're asking for the birth control and abortion pills. They're asking for the birth control and abortion pills. I don't know how you can amplify their voices. They are raping my people. Not just the girls, students, children, boy, girl. In the prison, they are raping everybody.
I'm an Iranian. I was born and grew up in Tehran, but left and came here to find a different kind of life. I left Iran, but the truth is Iran hasn't left me. And in the past few weeks, I was reminded of that. And I think it was so naive of me to think I have found peace, while in fact, I really haven't. I really haven't found peace. In the past few weeks, few days, I think we're all a ball of mixed feelings to the extent that we're all cracking. It's so contradictory that you can have this much different feelings at the same time. And I'm not sure if it would be the same if I was in Iran. I had the same, not very same, but a kind of a same feeling when I was in Iran in #. I had the same kind of experiences, and I remember how traumatized I was. So I can only imagine for these girls and women and men that what they're going through. But it's very different this time. For me, at least, it's very, very different. I think watching everything from afar has made me personally feel very guilty that I'm not there standing with these brave women and men, guilty that I'm not there asking for the rights, asking for the basic things, guilty that I'm not there just asking for what they've done to the likes of me, not just me, but like my parents, my the whole generation. They have, and I'm sorry to say this, but they genuinely fucked us up. I think they have traumatized us from a very young age, suppressed a lot of things, and I think it is with us. It's still with me to this day, that I know my right, that I know what I can and cannot do and should not do. I still question it sometimes, because I think it's so embedded in my head that a lot of times I think I'm not obliged to have this or that, and this is absurd. The whole the thing that they have done to us, I think it's not just now. I think it's not just in #, and I think it was not just 10, 20 years ago. It's the whole generations during wartime. Do you know how many children, they just sacrificed their life because of such a shameful ideology? Like, why would you want to have a 14-year-old kid to think it's good to die and kill themselves in war? And I think it's just absurd. It's very absurd. But this time for me, watching everything from afar has made me very guilty again. I think I just have to repeat that again and again and again. But this when I look at these women and girls and men praying for their rights, asking for what they simply should have, and singing in the street, taking off their scarf in the streets, I think I feel proud. I really feel proud. I feel happy. I feel hopeful. But at the same time, when I see them beaten up by the Islamic regime and forces, I feel sadness, I feel pain, and I feel rage. I think most of all, rage. To the extent that I just wish I had some kind of a superpower and I could go and blow them up, and so I could protect these people. It's a funny concept, I guess. But I think it's such a shame that we are all living in a world where children, women and men are being killed by their government. Not just one and not just two shootings, and not just in Iran, but in mass shootings in many countries and communities. And while these people are being killed, I think the rest of the righteous world are just watching and barely even talking about it. And it's just like a dust under the carpet, you know. They just talk about human rights, but no action is taken across the globe. It's very absurd. I think we're all living in a disgusting world, and it's just sad and absurd.
Very happy this evening to give a warm welcome to activist Steve Marsling, who has had a hand in helping turn over the terrible apartheid in South Africa, and who himself is a London-based white person, let's say, who you wouldn't at first glance think would be interested in supporting the cause in South Africa. So Steve's going to talk to us a little bit about, please how you first got into being active for a cause that might not be considered your own?
Yes. Oh, thank you, Fari. I hope I've said that right. Is it Fari?
Yep, Fari's fine.
I first got involved in looking at internationalism with the Vietnam War and some of the demonstrations that were going on against the American invasion of Vietnam. And also one of the major causes in the 60s and 70s, which was brought to our attention by the anti-apartheid movement, was the situation in South Africa where 10-15% of the population had a vote and the rest of the population had no vote, had no rights, and everything was strictly regulated, black, non-black. I thought this was shocking. So we set up the anti-apartheid movement, all sorts of posters. If you could see their national sport with an Afrikaner beating someone with a truncheon, you wouldn't be so keen on playing cricket with them. We participated in Stop the Cricket Tours, Stop the Rugby Tours, Don't Buy South African Wine, Don't Buy Cape Apples. This became a very, very big situation where thousands upon thousands of people became aware of the injustice in South Africa.
So the anti-Vietnam protests were in London, and that's where you met people who told you more about South Africa?
Not just in London, but mainly in London, and I was in London. Yeah, I was in the Elephant and Castle area where I was born and bred. And but we got involved because, you know, natural justice, I think most people want fairness. And so we got involved. And then later on, I was asked to meet someone from the African National Congress. And I said, well, willingly. And he chatted to me and he said, well, would you be prepared with someone else of your choosing? Would you be prepared to enter South Africa and to set up some kind of propaganda or some kind of activism that could show the people that the African National Congress was still around? We'd like you to go to Cape Town in South Africa and organise how to distribute leaflets.
Okay, is that because they couldn't go themselves?
They couldn't go themselves. They were banned. At that time, in the early 1970s, the African National Congress was either, the leadership was either life in prison, murdered, or had disappeared into exile, because at that time the South African regime said that their murderous regime would last for 1,000 years, a bit like the Third Reich in Germany. And so the interior movement of the African National Congress had been obliterated. So
Nelson Mandela was in prison then?
Nelson Mandela was life in prison.
Yeah.
And so Oliver Tambo, who took over from Nelson Mandela, had a great idea. He said, look, the only people that can move around South Africa freely are white people. And if we send white people over to South Africa, they're not going to be interfered with. I didn't need a passbook. We were posing as honeymoon couples, business people, or just friendly tourists.
Can we just rewind, though? This is an amazing arc that you've told us of progress for you. So you started as a sort of Cockney white boy living in Elephant Castle, hearing about injustices in other countries, in other places.
Yeah.
What motivates someone, from your perspective, what motivated you as a young... Were you a teenager?
I was, when I went to South Africa, I mean,
when you first became interested.
Oh, when I first became interested, I was about 18, 19. I was looking at the world. I was interested in socialist ideas. And yeah, I mean, that's what started me looking at the world.
And did you feel a kind of optimism that you could make an impact, even though it wasn't something related to you? that you could go around London and tell people around London, or show people through your protest, that these things were impactable, like they weren't fixed things?
That was what we were trying to do with the campaign to boycott South African goods, with the campaign to boycott playing their sport, because of course their cricket team was all white, their rugby union team was all white. So they were brazen. They would not pick a black person. So we went and tried to organise how and why this was wrong. And by and large, the public support for our standing grew.
Can you unpack that a bit? Like, how did the public support grow? Because you didn't have internet then. You didn't have hashtags.
No.
You didn't have video phones.
We were disrupting the rugby and the cricket matches.
Oh my God!
England
You were
playing.
breaking the law.
We were breaking the law.
Can you tell me a few useful ways of breaking the law that doesn't harm anyone, that other people might consider?
Yeah, we were just saying, you shouldn't be playing against an all-white team. The country, is 80% black, and no one can be allowed to play for South Africa who's non-white, and this is just basically wrong. And a lot of rugby union or a lot of cricket officials were puce with anger with us. But the majority of the public started looking at this situation and saying yes. And we had posters, we had leaflets, we had hard-hitting leaflets and posters.
So you went to a game and you started giving out leaflets to the audience, or did you run out onto the pitch? Tell me exactly what you did.
Well, a lot of people. I mean, it was... some people ran onto the pitch to disrupt the game. We were marching. We were trying to get people not to turn up, not to attend the game. So it was a mixture, a multiplication of civil disobedience and leafleting and talking to people, talking to MPs and things like that, that's saying basically, this situation is wrong.
Okay, so that's
against
really
human rights.
Okay, so if the team had say black people in it, even though they still had apartheid and they were treating black people terribly, even if the team had been 100% black, it would still have been representative of a government. They would have been little sort of bought pawns in a sort of, because football's a business, isn't it? And it's also a national pride. So do you think that if the team had been black, you would have been able to still say to those MPs when you went to see them, you shouldn't be including South Africa in the World Cup, you shouldn't be treating them like a legitimate team, because the government that they that they represent, that is supporting them, is a human rights abuser at the highest level. It's not even black. It's not even in doubt. So
well, that was never going to be the case, because
I'm just trying to think about. Yeah.
It's the whole basis of apartheid was, they called it separate development. So black people, Asian people couldn't go to the same schools as white people. They couldn't sit on a park bench next to each other. They couldn't travel on the same bus. They couldn't go to the cinema together, and they certainly couldn't play sports together. So it was never going to happen that any South African team would be represented by black people.
Okay, so let's leave South Africa then. It's very interesting to me that you talk to MPs. Maybe we can come back to that in a minute. But let's think about another country, say Iran. They send their team to Qatar to play the World Cup, and all ideas of sportsmanship are employed, and this idea of sort of international community and governments and countries shoulder to shoulder and shaking hands with the team that lost and everything. And it just seems to me how, even though your team might be representative of not of the minorities that are being abused, if a country is abusing human rights to such an extent that it's just not even in question, so how can they be involved in something like sportsmanship at an international level?
Well, first of all, the Iranian football authorities are breaking the rules of FIFA, because FIFA says that no one should be going to the World Cup if they are, unless they have fair and equal rules for women's football, and Iran clearly doesn't. So if FIFA allow Iran to go to Qatar to play in the World Cup, they're breaking their own rules. And I understand that FIFA are having a meeting either next week or the week after to discuss this situation.
Yeah, because they seem to respond very well to there's been lots of pressure on calls to them to disqualify the regime through disqualifying the team. But the problem is FIFA seem to pick up more on the fact that women aren't allowed in stadiums, and they asked Iran to explain this, and Iran temporarily allowed women into stadiums historically for the first time to watch football alongside men, but then they quickly closed that down and then started beating women with batons if they tried to get into a stadium either as a woman or, as they often do, dressed as a man, trying to pretend they're a man. And these beatings aren't light beatings, they're batons, they're evil. I wonder why FIFA responds better to the idea of women's equality than they do with shooting teenagers in schools, and why do they not engage with the idea of human rights as a general freedom of expression and why do they not engage with that as much as they do with just simple things like women's access to football?
Well, exactly. I mean, how can you ignore the fact that, Iranian women who participate in sports, and if they go abroad, they have to sign over, in some instances, their money and their property to the Iranian authorities in order to make sure that they wear the kind of clothing that the Iranian authorities want them to wear, that they make sure that anything, their hair is covered, and if it should be. This is outrageous. It's absolutely outrageous.
But I think I know the answer to your question. As devil's advocate, I'd have to say that if FIFA did engage with that level of censure with governments like that, there would be much fewer teams playing, and it would be a sort of sparse World Cup, to say.
Well, it would be, and it wouldn't be played in Qatar, which has a human rights record which is quite appalling, using slave labour to build stadiums. And personally, I think it's a shameful World Cup. And I'm a football fanatic. I'm a Millwall season ticket holder, but I will not be watching the World Cup simply because I just don't think it should have been there. It's all about money, 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 and ordinary people are just treated like rows of national insurance numbers. I think it's wrong, and absolute 100% solidarity with Iranian women who are actually being so incredibly brave in that country, as standing up and saying, we want to be treated like equals. I think it's amazing. And I can't tell you enough how much I admire those women who are standing up to a repressive regime. It's fantastic.
What's really different about this uprising is that men are supporting the women. They're putting themselves on the line.
Yes.
Teenagers, male and female, putting themselves on the line. School children refusing to sing the equivalent of Heil Hitler when the military stormed the school and asked them to conform and sing the song. They've beaten some schoolgirls to death for not singing the song. Also, grandparents. So I've seen a lot of videos that have brought me to tears of grandparents who've lived a life of oppression, who take off, some women take off their veils in the street and on video and say, I condemn this regime. And old men also in the street shouting for women life freedom. So it's just this amazing cross and intersectional cause.
It's so brave. And the interesting thing is that the world was brought to attention to South Africa in 1961 and the Sharpeville massacre, and that was shooting unarmed children, and also later on the Soweto uprising, where children were marching, demonstrating because they were told they had to speak Afrikaner, which was the language of the oppressor, and they gunned down 30 or 40 children in cold blood. Yeah. So it seems that these repressive regimes seem to hit children very, very hard. They have no respect at all.
I just wonder if we can blame it on the internet, perhaps, or news proliferation, is that people have developed a survival tactic, which is that you read about terrible things and you see terrible images and you feel helpless, and so you're able to switch off. Even though you feel compassion for people in those situations, you're not able to do anything about it necessarily. And in order to function in your own life and deal with your own issues, you're able to sort of compartmentalize that. So, for example, we know that in Turkey, Erdogan imprisons young girls for most of their life for singing in Kurdish, in their own language, and he kills people, and he gets rid of journalists and anyone who opposes him. Yet people still go there on holiday and enjoy the mosques and see the whirling dervishes. And so I feel the fact that this Iranian revolution was started by Mahsa Amini's death, and Mahsa was actually called Zina Amini, but she wasn't allowed to use her Kurdish name, and she was killed, a Kurdish woman, at 22 years old. And this has started also a discussion about how Kurds are treated, and I think it's really important for us to think about why people today can hear about these things and still just not do anything about it because they feel helpless. And so your example, Steve, of talking to MPs and being activist and getting the word out there without any social media or mobile phone video footage that you could use is really good. And I'd like to hear more about why and how you went to see MPs and how you engaged them.
Well, we went to see, I personally wasn't part of the delegation that went to MPs, but that was a man who became an MP, actually, Peter Hain, who was the Labour MP for Neath in Wales and became part of Tony Blair's cabinet, I think. He was a young South African who actually helped to organise the Stop the Tours movement. My involvement was on the demonstrations and also working clandestinely, if you like, in South Africa, working for the ANC and drawing attention at that time to the fact that the ANC was still alive, was still there. Yeah. My friend who was with me got caught, he was tortured, he was helped, they made him dig his own grave.
Oh my God.
And he was in solitary confinement for 8 months, and then he was given a prison sentence of 5 years, no remission. So yeah, that happened to quite a few people. People were thrown out of tall buildings by the police authorities. I mean, this was going on. But, you know, do you either stand back and say, oh, it's nothing to do with me, I'm not going to get involved because it's not my country? But how can you do that when you see something that's basically wrong? I think you have a duty to try and point that out, because if these tyrants get away with this, and that includes the Turkish Prime Minister against the Kurds, it includes the Saudi Arabians against the Yemeni people. If you allow that to go on, it will just encourage others. The more we shout, the more they think, oh, we better not do that, because, you know, Steve, you do stop them a bit.
Steve, where do people draw the line, though? Because obviously if you've got children and you've got your own things going on, what do? You can't get involved in every cause. So you pick a cause and say you go to see an MP, because MPs have surgeries, don't they?
Yeah, they have surgeries. You go to the MPs, you go to the trade unions, which we did, and say to them, look, you know, can you alert your members to what is going on here and join the boycott? Sorry?
Did the trade unions listen?
Yeah, they did. Yeah, they were fantastic. They were absolutely fantastic. They gave a lot of money and support to the anti-apartheid movement. They organised meetings. It was quite massive at the time, and we won. I mean, they no longer played cricket with them. They no longer played football. They no longer played rugby union. They were completely and totally isolated. We got them banned from the Olympics. They were ostracised from the Olympic movement.
How did you do that?
Pardon?
How did you get them banned from the Olympics?
We got them banned. Myself and a man called Sam Ramsamy, we organised the South African Non-Racial Olympic Committee. And we went to the Olympic movement and we said, look, These athletes from South Africa are not being picked on merit. They are being picked for the colour of their skin. This is absolutely contrary to your rules and regulations. And they agreed with us.
So if we could find examples where Kurdish minorities or others were not being picked for teams in Iran, we could say that they were excluding other religions and other ethnicities.
Yes, we could. We could. And we could turn around and say, look, to legitimise such an oppressive regime by playing sport with them is wrong.
Yeah, so how do you get a meeting with... I mean, when you said, OK, we're the non-racial group, I mean, what does that mean to be the non-racial group anyway?
Well, what we were saying was that South Africa's Olympic Committee was an all-white committee selecting all-white athletes to go to the Olympics.
No, I understand.
We said non-racial because we set up, or Sam Ramsamy and the African National Congress set up, I just helped, set up a non-racial Olympic committee that actually went into the Olympic movement and said to them, you know, this is something you should be doing. You should be in solidarity with the 80% majority. And they, after a while, with some fighting, with some, you know, arguments, they agreed.
In the same meeting?
Yeah, we went to meetings, we went to lobby, we went to campaign.
So when you say after a while, you mean after a prolonged period, not just in that one meeting?
Well, yeah, it doesn't come overnight. But the fact that South Africa had to stop coming to this country to play cricket and rugby, that really hurt them. That really hurt them.
Was it only England?
Yeah, well, what happened, it was interesting. The cricket authorities in this country, there was a South African-born player called Basil D'Oliveira.
We've only got 5 minutes, Steve, so you've got to make it short.
Okay, I'll make it very short. Basically, he wasn't selected to play for England because the South African authorities wouldn't let him in the country because he was black. And at first, the England cricket authorities went along with that. There was a mass outcry, and eventually they had to select him. He was one of the best players in England, so it was a travesty to leave him out. And when they had selected him, the South Africans called off the cricket tour and wouldn't allow England to go to South Africa.
Oh, so it started a tit for tat.
Yeah.
Okay, so I know from some of my South African friends and other people I've asked is the reason the white regime stepped down the way it did was because they felt they couldn't continue. They felt weakened to the point where they were either going to collapse or they should just give in. And it was better to get a sort of backhanded Nobel Prize, Peace Prize, than to continue and lose some kind of battle. So would you agree with that sort of surmising of why South Africa apartheid ended?
South Africa was under immense pressure from the African working class who were beginning to win military battles, and also because of the collapse of the Soviet Union, white South Africa was no longer needed by the West, and companies like Barclays were withdrawing. The country was basically bankrupt. It was being bankrolled by Western business. And they thought, we don't need to do this anymore. You'd better get majority rule. And that's what happened.
Say that last sentence again, please.
They had to get majority rule.
Who's they?
Because the South African white authorities had to have a general election for everybody because businesses were beginning to lose faith in the apartheid regime. So elections came, and of course, they all voted for the African National Congress and Nelson Mandela.
Lovely. It sounds like that election was just a huge flush. Okay, so we've only got about 4 minutes left, Steve. So if you were going to give people, say, a 10-point bullet point guide to things you can do around you to support a cause that maybe you don't fully understand or know about yourself, but at least you feel very strongly that people should be listening and talking more about, what points would you give people of things that they could do?
Well, first of all, you can talk with like-minded people, go to a meeting, find out what you can do. Can you get outside the Iranian embassy? Can you organise a petition? Can you get local journalists? They're usually very good giving people 5 minutes of this, 5 minutes of that.
Sorry, I don't understand, Steve. When you say you can get local journalists, what do you mean?
Yeah, you can get local journalists. Ring up your local newspaper. Tell them, we're organising something, and are they interested in coming along, having a camera? Can we send you photos?
Okay, yeah. And other things that you can do if you're very busy and you don't know how to protest, you don't know how to get involved. What other things did you do? Postering? Graffiti?
Yeah, you can do graffiti, but that sometimes annoys people more than you don't want things counterproductive. You want the mass of the people to be sympathetic to your cause. So if you start alienating them by writing all over stuff, I wouldn't recommend graffiti, because I don't think it's universally accepted by a lot of people.
Not debating, but just on billboards, like normal billboards and things like that, old posters.
Yeah, billboards, posters, newspapers, educating people. Do you know what's going on in Iran? Do you know what's going on in Turkey with the Kurdish people? No, I'm not, because the mainstream news media won't have a lot on that because it doesn't suit them. So we have to force that. We have to force the news, if you like, force the cause into the news by actually generating solidarity and meetings and that, because people will be interested. Did you know that women? You talk to people in the streets. Yes, women are not allowed to wear, certain things in this country. Would you agree with that? Talk to women in this country.
Why would the unions care about something like that, though?
Well, they do. They do care about that because they have a radical perspective on world movements, and they've been very, very good. I would always go to my union and to say, your international department should be doing something about this. And inevitably they do.
We've got less than a minute, so I'm going to say thank you, Steve. We feel very, very impassioned by you, and put power to your elbow for everything else you do.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Iranians are not against of Islam. They want regime to go. Regime use Islam, the name of Islam, to do anything. You can see in the world what they are doing. We want them to go. They must go. Islamic Republic of Iran must go. We are not stoppable.
Hello. Actually, my English is not very good, but I tried my best to talk and understand the meaning. I don't know how to describe it. I don't know how to tell you. It's really terrible. And I'm really getting crazy living in this hell. We cannot name it a country. It's a hell. It's a real hell. I'm sure nobody wants to live in this country, not even for a short period of time. I'm talking to the whole world, to the world leaders, to the European leaders, and the people all over the world. My question is, who is going to stand up for us, for our people, for our women? Iranian women do not need you to save them. Actually, we only need you to stop saving their murderers. And we are tired. We are sick and tired. We are really mentally tired. The real devil is in our country. All the work that a Satan can do, they do. The government, the security forces, and even the police are committing in a terrible crime in here. And They have been doing it even for years, but nobody is there to hear us, to understand us, what we are going through. Murders, crimes, terrible rapes, robbery, kidnapping people, arresting them for no reason, just for protesting, and returning their dead bodies. I want a country without stress, without tension, without depression, without killing my people and torturing them just for an evil and fake religion. This is not Islam. This is a fake religion. It's a Satan. Please save us. At least be our voice. Do something for Iran and their people. Do something for them. Help them. This is what I just can say.
So I think for me, what I like people to know, and in conversations that I've been having, is that what's happening in Iran at the moment is not something that people should be surprised by. The population are young, they're educated, they're connected, and despite what people think an Iranian is, they're not just sort of meek little beings that need to be rescued. However, Iran is a pariah state, and there's lots of reasons for that, and some of that is to do with them isolating themselves so that they can do what they're doing to their citizens. And there's only so far now, I think, that people can take themselves if they're not connected to the rest of the world. And so it's up to us to show solidarity by keeping it on your lips, on your minds, amplifying their voices when they do get internet access, to keep showing what's happening out there, and to be putting pressure on other world leaders to do something, because historically the global West in particular have had no problem in meddling with Iranian affairs and other affairs within the Middle East, and now's the time that they apparently choose to do nothing. The other thing I'd like to say as well is that this is not about taking pity on Iranians or saying poor Iranian women or arguing about what it is to be a good Muslim and whether like a headscarf is a thing or not, because it's not even about that. It's about everything else that surrounds that, and everyone under that system has the thumb pressed down on them in some way. And this is about a wider struggle, and if you're someone that has previously shown up to any kind of human rights demo, march, signed a petition, then this is one that you should be taking notice of too.
عشق